Imagine you wake up tomorrow, and something is slightly wrong. Not dramatic. Not movie-level chaos. Just wrong. Your phone lights up, and before you even touch it, your mind begins calculating, did I miss something? Is someone upset with me? Did I forget that one thing I promised? Why do I already feel behind? You haven't even left your bed, but your brain is already sprinting. Now imagine this happens every day. Not because you're weak. Not because you can't handle life. But because your mind has quietly turned into a surveillance system. One designed to protect you. It watches your relationships like security cameras. It scans your future like a radar dish. It reviews your past like courtroom evidence. And the terrifying part? At first, it feels like intelligence. It feels like responsibility. It feels like you're being careful, mature, ahead of the curve. But slowly, almost invisibly, something starts to go missing. You laugh, but you don't feel it in your chest. You rest, but your body never receives the message. You succeed, but the win evaporates in seconds, replaced by the next problem to solve. And one day you notice a strange, chilling thought. I'm functioning, but I don't feel alive. This isn't just burnout. This isn't just stress. This is something older, deeper. A philosophical problem hidden inside a psychological one. What happens when your mind becomes so loud that your soul can't be heard? Tonight we're going to walk through the philosophy of mental exhaustion. Why thinking too much can slowly empty you, how overthinking becomes an identity, and what it costs over years, not just in energy, but in meaning. And if you recognize yourself in any of this, the scariest part is next. Because the mind doesn't stop overthinking when it's tired. It overthinks because it's tired. So the question is, are you thinking your way to safety, or thinking your way into a cage? Here's the first uncomfortable truth. Overthinking isn't random. It's not just a bad habit. Overthinking is often a survival strategy that outlived its original purpose. Your brain is not designed primarily to make you happy. It's designed to keep you alive. And for most of human history, that meant one thing: predict danger before it arrives. In the wild, a mind that overthinks is a mind that lives longer. If you assume the rustle in the bushes is a predator, even when it's just the wind, you survive. If you don't assume that, you become lunch. Now fast forward to modern life. The predators changed, but your nervous system didn't. So now instead of a tiger, your mind hunts for rejection, embarrassment, failure, losing control, being misunderstood, not being enough. And it does it with the same ancient intensity. This is why overthinking feels urgent, like you're defusing a bomb, because your brain treats uncertainty like threat. So the mind begins building what looks like intelligence, but is often fear wearing a lab coat. You replay conversations not because you love analyzing language, but because you're trying to detect hidden danger. Did they mean that? Did I say too much? Did I sound stupid? Do they secretly hate me? You plan the future obsessively, not because you're visionary, but because unpredictability feels like death. And slowly you start living one step removed from life. Because you're no longer experiencing your day. You're monitoring it. Like you're watching your own existence through a control room window filled with screens. One screen shows the past. One screen shows possible futures. One screen shows what people might think. One screen shows what you should be doing. And somewhere behind all that is you. But here's where the soul part begins. When your attention is always split, your inner life becomes thin. Not because you're broken, but because meaning requires presence. Think of your attention like sunlight. Wherever it lands consistently, life grows. But if your sunlight is scattered across 40 different mental tabs, nothing receives enough light to bloom. So you become strangely productive, strangely aware, strangely capable, and yet emotionally dry. Now, if you're listening and thinking, okay, but I need to think. Thinking is how I solve problems. Yes, absolutely. But overthinking isn't problem solving. Overthinking is problem simulation without resolution. It's your mind moving in circles, mistaking movement for progress. Like a treadmill. You run and run and run. And at the end of the day you're exhausted. But you haven't actually gone anywhere. This is where the philosophy creeps in. Because in a subtle way, overthinking is a refusal to accept a basic fact of reality. You cannot control life completely. And the mind hates that. So it bargains. It says, if I just think enough, anticipate enough, analyze enough, I can prevent pain. But the price of that bargain is steep. Because the more you try to eliminate pain through thought, the less you can tolerate being human. And being human means sometimes being uncertain, sometimes being misunderstood, sometimes being wrong, sometimes being vulnerable, sometimes having no answer. Overthinking is often the mind's attempt to replace trust with control. And control is exhausting. Here's a metaphor. Imagine you're carrying a glass of water across a room. If you walk normally, it's easy. But if someone says, if you spill even one drop, everything you love disappears, what happens? Your hands shake, your muscles lock, your breathing becomes careful, your mind becomes loud. That's what overthinking does to life. It turns ordinary moments into high-stakes missions. And the soul, the part of you that feels wonder, ease, depth, connection, cannot thrive in a constant emergency. So let's pause and ask a question, one you should actually feel, not just answer. What are you trying to prevent with your thinking? Not superficially, deeply. Is it shame, rejection, being seen as not enough, a repeat of a past pain? Because if your mind is constantly running threat simulations, it's usually guarding an old wound. And that's why just relax never works. You can't relax a system that believes relaxing is dangerous. So the real solution isn't stop thinking. It's understanding why the mind believes thinking is the only way to survive. And that leads to the next layer. Because even if you aren't emotionally anxious, modern life is still designed to drain you cognitively. And that takes us to the second idea, the one that explains why you can feel mentally destroyed even on a day when nothing bad happened. Let's do a quick mental experiment. Imagine your brain is a computer. Not a magical infinite machine. A real computer. It has limited RAM, limited battery, limited processing speed, and it overheats when too many programs run at once. Now ask yourself, how many programs are running in your mind right now? One is tracking your responsibilities. Point one is tracking your relationships. Point one is tracking your self-image. Point one is tracking the future. Point one is tracking money. Point one is tracking what I should be doing. One is tracking what I'm failing at. And we act like we should be fine. Because none of these programs are physical. You're not lifting rocks. You're not running from predators. So you assume, why am I tired? I barely did anything. But cognitive load is real load. Your brain burns energy simply by deciding, filtering, inhibiting impulses, and switching attention. And modern life is basically a factory built to force constant switching. A notification, a headline, a message, a comparison, a task, a choice. Even your rest is filled with micro-decisions. What should I watch? Should I reply now? Should I scroll more? Should I be productive? Should I sleep? Should I optimize my sleep? And this is where mental exhaustion becomes philosophical again. Because the mind isn't just tired. It's overmanaged. Your consciousness is being treated like a project. Like something to optimize. And when everything becomes optimization, life becomes a test you can never finish. Now we hit a key concept. Decision fatigue. The more decisions you make, the worse your decisions become, and the more exhausted you feel. But here's the darker part. Overthinking creates artificial decisions. It turns non-decisions into decisions. A normal brain says, I'll wear this shirt. An overthinking brain says, is this the right shirt for how I want to be perceived? Will this affect how confident I feel? Does this communicate the identity I want? What if someone remembers I wore it last week? And suddenly, choosing a shirt consumes the energy of negotiating a peace treaty. So your day becomes heavy before it even begins. Not because your life is impossible, but because your mind is treating life like it must be solved. Now imagine this over months. You begin to lose something subtle. Spontaneity. Because spontaneity requires a certain wastefulness. It requires the ability to do things without needing them to be optimal. But overthinking hates waste. So you stop doing things you can't justify. You stop resting unless you earned it. You stop enjoying unless it's productive. You stop being playful unless it has a purpose. And here your inner world starts to feel like a workplace. A strict one. The kind where you're always being monitored. And in a strange twist, you become both the worker and the boss. You are the employee trying to live. And you are the manager demanding performance. So you're never off the clock. Now let's escalate. Because if your mental energy is constantly taxed, two things happen. Your tolerance for uncertainty collapses. Your emotional range narrows. The first is obvious. When you're tired, everything feels more threatening. Your brain says, I can't handle surprises today. So it tries to predict everything, which increases overthinking. The second is the quiet tragedy. When the mind is exhausted, it stops feeling subtle emotions. It doesn't have the bandwidth. So you get fewer shades of experience. Joy becomes muted. Curiosity becomes rare. Even sadness becomes flat. You don't feel dramatic despair. You feel dullness. And dullness is dangerous because it doesn't scream. It whispers. It says, "Is this all life is?" This is why mental exhaustion can feel like your soul is emptying, not because you're dying, but because you're living without depth. Your brain becomes a machine that processes life instead of tasting it. Now pause and imagine this question. What if your exhaustion isn't from doing too much, but from thinking you must manage everything perfectly? And now we're ready for the third layer. Because eventually, overthinking stops being a response to life and becomes a philosophy of life, a worldview, a way of existing that replaces living with analyzing. And this is where things get existential. There's an old idea, echoed in different forms across philosophy. The map is not the territory. The map helps you navigate, but it's not the place. Overthinking is what happens when you start living on the map. You stop being in the territory of real experience, and you live in representations of it. What it means, how it looks, what it implies, what it might become, what it says about you. In a way, overthinking is an attempt to escape direct contact with reality, because reality is messy, but thought is clean. In thought, you can rewind.in thought, you can redo.in thought, you can be safe. But life doesn't happen in thought. Life happens in the risky, imperfect present. So the more you retreat into thinking, the more life begins to feel like something you're observing rather than inhabiting. And that's where the soul begins to starve. Because meaning is not built from perfect logic. Meaning is built from contact, from intimacy with reality, from fully being in moments that cannot be optimized. Now, let's bring in the existential philosophers because they saw this trap clearly. One of the most haunting ideas in existentialism is that humans can become alienated from themselves, not through external chains, but through inner avoidance. You avoid uncertainty by thinking. You avoid vulnerability by analyzing. You avoid risk by rehearsing. And slowly you become a spectator of your own life. Now here's the paradox. You think to gain control, but the more you think, the less free you become. Because freedom requires action, and action requires accepting imperfection. So overthinking becomes a form of self-imprisonment that feels like intelligence. This is why mental exhaustion can feel philosophical. It's not just tiredness. It's the exhaustion of trying to justify existence. You begin to treat your own life like it must have a reason at every moment. And when you can't find the reason, the mind panics. This is where nihilism creeps in, not as a belief but as a feeling. If I can't understand my life, maybe it's meaningless. But here's what's really happening. Meaning isn't absent. Your attention is. Your mind is so busy interpreting life that it stops receiving it. And you can't feel meaning in a moment you're not present for. Now let's escalate further. Overthinking also creates a hidden identity. The self as a problem to solve. You start believing that if you could just figure yourself out, you'd finally be at peace. So you analyze your trauma, your attachment style, your childhood, your personality type, your habits, your productivity, your dopamine, your purpose. You become your own never-ending research project. And self-awareness is valuable until it turns into self-surveillance. Because then you're not learning, you're policing. And policing creates fatigue, shame, and disconnection. Now, let's add a Buddhist lens, because Buddhism has a brutal way of describing mental suffering. The mind clings. It grasps for certainty. It tries to hold what cannot be held. And when it fails, it suffers. Overthinking is a form of clinging to certainty. You want to know the outcome before you live the path. But the path is the only place life can happen. So you keep thinking. And the more you think, the more you realize you can't fully know. So you think more. And eventually you're not tired from life. You're tired from resisting life's uncertainty. Now pause. Imagine this. What if your mind is not a wise narrator, but an anxious storyteller, constantly rewriting reality to feel safe? And what if mental exhaustion is the moment you realize you cannot think your way into peace? Peace is not a conclusion. It's a relationship with uncertainty. And now we need to make this real. Because abstract philosophy is interesting, but mental exhaustion is lived. So let's drop into a story, one that happens to people quietly every day. Imagine your life as a timeline. Not dramatic, not tragic, just normal. Month 1. You're stressed, but you're functional. You tell yourself you're just busy. You think a lot at night, but you call it planning. Month 3. You start waking up tired, not sleepy. Tired in the way that feels like your brain never powered down. You sit with friends and laugh at the right moments, but inside you're doing math. How do I seem right now? Am I being weird? Should I be more interesting? Month 6. You start losing the ability to choose without tension. Small choices start to feel heavy. You stare at menus too long. You reread messages before sending. You delay decisions because every option has hidden consequences. And because decision-making feels painful, you begin avoiding. Month 9. Your world shrinks. Not physically. Internally. You stop doing things that used to make you feel alive because they feel inefficient. You stop starting projects because you can't guarantee you'll finish perfectly. You stop resting because rest triggers guilt. You stop being spontaneous because spontaneity feels unsafe. And your inner voice becomes a constant critic. You should be doing more. You're wasting time. You're falling behind. You're too. This is where this soul language makes sense. Because what empties isn't your schedule. It's your vitality. You can still perform, but you can't recharge. Your brain is always on. Even in silence. Even on vacation. Even in bed. And eventually, a strange emotional symptom appears. Nothing feels fully satisfying. Not because you're ungrateful. Because satisfaction requires the ability to stop. And your mind doesn't stop. So every achievement becomes a stepping stone to the next demand. Every moment becomes a means to an end. And then one day you notice the scariest change. You don't even know what you want anymore. Because you've been living inside should for so long that want went quiet. So you scroll. You snack. You distract. You chase small hits of relief. Not pleasure, relief. And here's the part most people don't realize. Mental exhaustion isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a slow dimming. Like the lights in a room fading so gradually you don't notice. Until you look up and realize you've been living in twilight. Now I want you to imagine something. What if you continue like this for 10 years? Not collapsing. Just functioning. What kind of person do you become? A person who can explain everything but can't feel much. A person who can analyze meaning but can't taste it. A person who is safe, but not alive. And that's the real danger. Not burnout that forces you to stop, but burnout that becomes normal. Now we move into the turning point. Because once you see the pattern, a new question appears. If overthinking is the cage, what is the key? Here's the hardest part to accept. Your mind may be exhausting you, because it believes exhaustion is the price of safety. Thinks, if I relax, something will go wrong. If I stop analyzing, I'll miss a threat. If I stop planning, I'll fail. If I stop thinking, I'll fall apart. So when you try to rest, the mind panics. It fills the silence with noise. It throws you memories, problems, hypotheticals. Not because it hates you, because it's protecting you the only way it knows how. But protection can become imprisonment. So the key isn't fighting your mind. The key is changing your relationship to it. This is where philosophy becomes practical. Because many philosophical traditions, Stoicism, Buddhism, existentialism, point to the same psychological move. Stop demanding certainty from life. Not as a slogan, as a daily practice. You don't need to eliminate thought. You need to stop worshiping thought as your only tool. Because some problems cannot be solved by thinking more. Some are solved by feeling, accepting, acting, resting, being imperfect, letting the unknown exist. So let me ask you a question that might sting. What if the thing you call thinking is actually a ritual of control? And what if your exhaustion is not a failure, but a signal? A message from your deeper self. This isn't how you're meant to live. Now imagine this alternative timeline. You still have problems. You still have responsibilities. But your mind is no longer the dictator of your attention. Thought becomes a tool again, not a prison. You begin to notice small things. The taste of water, the texture of air at night, the feeling of music in your ribs, the strange miracle of being conscious at all. Not as fake positivity, as re-entry into reality. Because the soul doesn't get refilled by answers. It gets refilled by presence. And presence is terrifying at first. Because presence means you feel what you've been avoiding. Grief, fear, loneliness, desire. But it also means you feel beauty, laughter, intimacy, awe. And that's the trade. Overthinking offers protection from pain, at the cost of protection from life. So the real question is, how much life are you willing to miss to avoid discomfort? So here's what we've uncovered. Mental exhaustion isn't always caused by doing too much. Sometimes it's caused by living with a mind that never stops scanning, managing, and rehearsing reality. Overthinking begins as survival.it becomes cognitive overload. Then it becomes a worldview, where you live on the map, not the territory. And slowly you don't just lose energy. You lose depth. You lose the ability to fully arrive in your own life. That's why it can feel like your soul is emptying. Not in a mystical sense. In a human sense. The part of you that feels meaning can't survive in constant emergency mode. But the story isn't hopeless, because the mind is not the enemy. It's a protector that needs retraining. And the first step isn't stop thinking. It's noticing. When you're thinking, are you solving, or are you trying to feel safe? Because once you see that, you can start practicing a different kind of strength. The strength to live without complete certainty. The strength to be imperfect. The strength to let life be risky. And in that risk, something returns. Not answers. Not control. But aliveness. So tonight, when your mind starts spinning, try this. Don't argue with it. Just ask it quietly. What are you afraid will happen if I stop? And then, just for a moment, feel the silence behind the question. Because that silence might be the first sound your soul has made in a long time.